Kia ora, and welcome to my chorus for Friday, September the 5th. I'm Bernard Hickey for the Kaka. This is my video and podcast that goes out with an email newsletter via Substack. It's called the Kaka, and it's all about Aotearoa's political economy around housing, climate, and poverty. The Reserve Bank has been in the news in the last couple of weeks in a big way, and we've got an interesting intervention today from the Westpac New Zealand Chief Economist, Kelly Eckholt, who's come out and said that the new Reserve Bank Governor, who's yet to be appointed, we don't know exactly who it is likely to or should look at changing the inflation target that the Reserve Bank currently has. Obviously, that's something that would have to be done in conjunction with the current Finance Minister, Nicola Willis, in the government. But Kelly Eckholt, in a note that's published today, which I've linked to in the email newsletter, suggests lifting the midpoint of the inflation target range from where it is now, 2%, that's the midpoint between 1 and 3%, and lifting that midpoint to 2.5%. Now, that in theory would allow the Reserve Bank to run the economy a bit hotter than it would previously have been able to, allow it to lower unemployment, and also allow it to lower interest rates. So that's an interesting idea, and certainly people are now seem to be freer to debate this issue of whether the Reserve Bank's 1 to 3% target band has worked, whether its sole focus on keeping inflation low has worked, and whether Reserve Bank independence has worked. Because we've got some new news today on that. Toby Manhire from the Spin-Off has a scoop this morning that the much debated timeline for the exit of Adrian Orr that was declared by the Reserve Bank did not include an urgent special Valentine's Day meeting of the Reserve Bank board to consider the crisis with Adrian Orr at that time. So you might recall, out of the blue, apparently, back in early March, Adrian Orr resigned without saying why. And the chairman, Neil Quigley, was eventually dragged in front of cameras and also tried to say he didn't know why Adrian Orr was resigning. Now, after some pretty heavy Official Information Act requests, we eventually learned that Adrian Orr left effectively in protest at the Reserve Bank's budget being cut, and after some fairly heated meetings with both Nicola Willis and officials within Treasury. Now, this had all been discussed by the board of the Reserve Bank, who had written Adrian Orr a letter, and eventually they came to an agreement by which Adrian Orr would leave. And Neil Quigley, effectively, in the process of not disclosing all these things, lost the confidence of Nicola Willis. He resigned last Friday night, and Nicola Willis said that if he hadn't resigned, she would have sacked him. Although it again begs the question, with all these board meetings going on and letters flying back and forth, which Nicola Willis seemed to know about at the time, it's hard to suggest that Neil Quigley was the only one not keeping the public completely informed, including the fact that for a good week or so, the Reserve Bank did not have a chief executive or a governor, and no one knew about it. So that's a nice little scoop there from Toby Manhire. I wanted to, though, spend a little bit of time looking at this issue raised by Kelly Eckholt, and also look at a couple of other items that have come up today in the news, and I think it's worth pointing to. So Kelly Eckholt is saying, hey, why don't we reset this target range to 2.5%? He says that will be more in tune with where we've actually had inflation over the last 20 or 30 years or so, including the last sort of 10 to 15 year average is around that 2.5% mark. So an interesting idea. Certainly it would take some pressure off interest rates. Kelly Echold there suggesting that that's done in the process of shifting to a new governor. We also don't have a new chair of the Reserve Bank Board. Now, some news on the economy that came out yesterday and didn't get a lot of publicity. This is the measure of building work put in place in the June quarter. Now, this is very closely watched by people forecasting GDP, and this was weaker than expected, with the June quarter building work put in place for residential falling substantially, as did non-residential, a drop of around 8%. And almost $4 billion down from the same quarter a year ago. This suggests that the GDP number for the June quarter is likely to be negative, perhaps even more negative than the 0.1%, 0.2% the Reserve Bank's been forecasting in its nowcast result, and just reinforces how the freeze in government spending on housing, roading, hospitals and schools at the beginning of 2024 flowed through into the economy and contributed to the loss of 16,000 construction jobs. I think it's worth pointing to a story you might not have seen. I've included it as a link in today's email newsletter to a case of a company director who's just been fined $54,000 after using a warehouse in Manurewa to house temporary migrants. So what you're seeing there is a picture of this warehouse in which 21 little containery cabin things were put into this warehouse to house 42 working migrants. So these are people on temporary work visas. They were from the Philippines, probably in construction. And the director of this company was effectively housing them while they were working as temporary migrants, and no doubt would have been charging the migrants for this accommodation. This work was not consented work, and the Auckland Council has been following up and prosecuting this case. There's more details in the links to a report from the Auckland Council on this issue. I point to it only to emphasise some of the real problems we have with our reliance on temporary migration. Effectively, it enables exploitation of people who are working for us. It enables lower wages than would otherwise be the case, and we shouldn't be blind to the conditions that many of our guests and the people that we work with are living in. It's awful. We have a housing crisis. And just a few more pictures here of what this looked like, these containers in a warehouse, 2 people to a container. Not ideal, you'd have to say. Paul Knights was the director who was fined $54,000. That's the picture of the container of the building, the warehouse in Manurewa, which was used to house people. The other thing that's worth mentioning, I think, today in the press, it's reported that Hardeep Singh, the so-called Liquor King of Christchurch, was adjudged bankrupt, or the company that he was running was adjudged bankrupt. And this is an important one because people have been following his case for a long time. He's been regularly fined and convicted of migrant abuse and exploitation. This is where often students coming from India are working in these liquor stores for many, many hours of the day, not paid all of the hours that they work, and often there and hoping that at some point they'll get residency with help from Mr. Singh. And the name of the liquor chain in Christchurch is Big Daddy's Liquor Chain. He had about a dozen of these stores. And you might have seen so many of these things pop up around towns and cities in the last decade or so. This is because many of them are able to keep operating with low costs, often using student migrants and not paying them properly, not giving them sick leave, holiday leave, those sorts of things. And it just emphasizes another example of our economy, which is reliant on a housing market expansion and cheap migration. The other thing that's worth following, I think, is the Auckland Council's call for a crackdown by the government on boarding houses. It's done a survey of boarding houses, found that 30 of the 35 it surveyed were actually unauthorised. Some of them are old houses with 5 or 6 bedrooms, but they've been carved up into, for example, 27 rooms. And there's some good work being done by Adrian Wilson at the Auckland Council, pointing to this issue. Many of these unauthorised boarding houses are providing services to WINS and corrections, who have to find rooms for people at short notice. Maybe they've just come out of prison, or they're applying for emergency accommodation. And he points out rightly, if you've got 24 people living in a house designed for 5 or 6, and you've got no smoke detectors, fire alarms, fire exits, this is a real risk. Some of them have been shut down. Again, part of our story of population growth that hasn't been catered for in advance with infrastructure and housing, massive housing shortages, which makes things unaffordable and dangerous. And again, part of our housing unaffordability, migrant and homeless abuse problem. And for more on that, have a good look at the RNZ's Pinch Point series, which I've linked to in the email newsletter. There's 3 or 4 of these excellent articles, deep dives into cost of living issues throughout the country. Again, this is all sheeting back to the issue we have with unaffordable housing. And just finally, a good deep dive from Stuff today on this issue you might have heard about Mike Joy, the water scientist who is a campaigner to reduce the prevalence of often dirty dairying farms that constantly leach nitrates into the groundwater, as well as pollute streams with E. coli and the likes. He came out and said a quite controversial thing a couple of days ago online, saying that hanging for baby murdering need to be brought back. He subsequently apologised for that. But the deep dive from Stuff basically says, well, what was the problem with nitrates that Mike Joy was raising? What is going on here? And has linked to a very useful report, including this great map showing the red dots are the places where nitrate levels are worse than safe levels. And you're having a look there. You can see the red dots often in South Canterbury, where you've seen those dairy conversions, parts of the Waikato and Southland. So one to keep an eye on there. I'm Bernard Hickey. I hope you enjoyed that chorus on Friday, September the 5th. Ka kite anō. Have a great weekend.